Hey Crafty fam, it's Alex Vanover and welcome to my sublimation series. In this very first episode, I'm going to talk to you about what sublimation is and give you 6 steps for where to get started sublimating on your own. Now, throughout the sublimation series, I'm going to be covering all kinds of different topics, including a lot of the things that I really found confusing about sublimation when I was getting started, as well as giving you all the information that you need to start doing sublimation on your own. So make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, DIY Alex, so that you always get notified when I upload a new episode of this series or any other video that I upload at least once a week, every single week. So let's get started into this episode. In order to get started with sublimation, first you need to understand the sublimation process and how it works. So I'm going to ask myself and answer a couple of questions in order to explain it. The first one is, what is sublimation and how does it work? Essentially, sublimation is the process of heating up a sublimation ink so that it turns into a gas. And while it's a gas, it infuses itself into polyester coated surfaces or garments with a high amount of polyester. Then as the gas begins to cool down, it turns back into a solid and the ink remains fused into the surface of a polyester coated fabric for the long term. What that means from a crafter's perspective is that you need to have a specialty sublimation printer with sublimation ink inside of it. Then you print out sublimation designs onto sublimation paper, and then you press them using high heat onto polyester coated or high polyester garments like t-shirts. And then once you press the design onto the garment, it stays for the long term for the rest of the life of the blank. So for example, with this shirt, I pressed this on with sublimation ink. There's tons of colors in it, but it's totally flat. So it just feels like the surface of the shirt. The next question that we need to answer is, what is required for sublimation? Sublimation can only occur when you use sublimation ink onto a high polyester surface. So that means that a dedicated sublimation printer with sublimation ink inside of it is required. And the surface that you're pressing the ink onto must have a high polyester content. So if you're using a hard surface, it must have a polyester coating on top of it. You'll hear these referred to as sublimation blanks. The color also must be white or very, very light in order for the ink to show up. If you're pressing sublimation ink onto a shirt or a garment, it must have a bare minimum of 50% polyester content, but preferably more like 65% polyester or higher. The higher the polyester content in the garment, the brighter the sublimation ink will be. Also, high heat is required in order to heat up sublimation ink. So either a heat press or an easy press 2 are required for sublimation. An iron will not work. Notice that a Cricut machine is not required with sublimation. That is because there is no cutting or weeding involved in the process. So now that you know about sublimation and how it works, let's talk about those 6 steps to getting started to sublimation all on your own. Step number 1 is that you need to buy a brand new printer that you'll use for sublimation. I recommend an Epson EcoTank model. I currently use an Epson ST2000 and an Epson ST4000, both of which I got from 143vinyl.com, and I've been super pleased with both of them. The reason that I recommend an Epson EcoTank model is because they're much easier to fill with sublimation ink rather than some of the printers that you have to buy empty cartridges for and all of that fancy stuff. One really easy way to tell that a printer is an Epson EcoTank is you'll be able to see the ink tanks right on the front of the printer, just like you can see in both of these. Now, any Epson EcoTank model will work for sublimation, so I recommend that you shop around and find one at the best price that you can. If you want to hear more information about printers and my recommendations, then watch the second episode of this series all about printers. I'll go ahead and link it for you up in the corner of the screen and down in the description below. Step number 2 to getting started on your own with sublimation is buying sublimation ink, sublimation paper, and sublimation blanks. When you're buying sublimation ink, I recommend buying it in any brand that have bottles that come like this, because when you open up the top of this ink bottle, you'll see a circle in the middle with 2 of these pieces coming out the sides. These types of shaped bottles were made to fit on top of Epson EcoTank printers, so it makes adding ink into your printer so much easier. So far, I really enjoyed working with the StarCraft brand of ink, but basically any reputable ink brand will work just fine. The other options could be Cosmos ink, Printer's Jack ink, or Hippo ink. Now, if you're not sure what type of ink you want to buy, I recommend reading reviews and watching comparison videos between the different brands in order to decide what works best for you. Next, when you're buying sublimation paper, I have worked with 2 different brands and I've really liked both of them. So far, I've worked with ASUB sublimation paper and StarCraft sublimation paper. The advantage to working with ASUB sublimation paper is that they've been around for a lot longer. So if you buy a printer that has a large format option, like 11 by 17 or 13 by 19, you'll be able to buy ASUB paper in all of those sizes. And all of that is linked in my Amazon store, so I'll link that for you in the description below. I really enjoyed working with StarCraft sublimation paper as well. It's just a little bit newer to the market, so it doesn't have those extended sizes available yet, but I'm sure they will be soon. And all of those are from 143 Vinyl, so I'm sure we'll be able to shop them all from there. Now, lastly, you need to buy some Sublimation Blanks to experiment with. If you're looking for blanks other than shirts, I buy most of mine at 143vinyl.com. They carry all different kinds of really fun blanks, such as like this sequin pillow cover. They carry tumblers and aluminum signs and Christmas ornaments and so many different fun options. So I recommend checking them out for non-shirt sublimation blanks. And if you do decide to shop at 143 Vinyl, you can use my affiliate code to save on your printer, your paper, your ink, or even your blanks. So I'll put it down in the description for you if you want to go check that out. If you're looking to shop for sublimation shirts, then I recommend shopping at jiffyshirts.com. My favorite style of shirts on Jiffy Shirts for sublimation are the Gildan Soft Style Shirts. But keep in mind that any shirt blank that you buy has to have these requirements in order to work for sublimation. First, remember that it has to have a bare minimum of 50% polyester, preferably something like 65% or higher, in order to make the ink nice and bright. The other requirement that it has to have is it has to be white or very light colored in order for the ink to show up. You can sublimate on darker shirts if you bleach them first, but then that turns into like a whole nother thing. So when you're brand new, I recommend starting with high polyester, light colored shirts. The third step is to convert your brand new Epson EcoTank printer into a sublimation printer. All converting a printer means is actually adding sublimation ink into the printer before you ever turn it on. I don't know about you, but I was super intimidated by the word converting a printer because I thought that it meant that I had to do something fancy. But honestly, if you bought a regular Epson EcoTank printer for your regular inkjet use, you'd have to fill up the EcoTanks before you turn it on with inkjet ink anyway. So you're just doing the same thing, except you're using specialty sublimation ink. But I know it can seem really hard and confusing, so I have another video in my sublimation series about converting a printer, so I'll go ahead and link it for you up in the corner of the screen and down in the description below. Step number 4 is to practice printing your designs on your new sublimation printer. Keep in mind that everything you print for sublimation needs to be flipped 180 degrees or mirrored. This is so that you can press the paper with the ink down directly onto the sublimation blank. Another thing to keep in mind is whenever you print your colors on your sublimation printer, they're gonna look really dull and kind of funky on the paper. But they'll look nice and bright once you press them on a sublimation blank, so don't panic if they look dull or funky coming out of the printer. Step number 5 is to try a complete sublimation project using one of the new sublimation blanks that you've bought. In order to make life a little bit easier, I recommend starting with one of the flat sublimation blanks that you purchased. They do make some really, really beautiful sublimation tumblers, but when you're just getting started, I recommend you start with something a bit simpler and start with a flat blank or a t-shirt. As far as the settings to use when you're doing the sublimation project, I always follow the settings that are recommended by the brand of sublimation paper that I'm using. So both ASUB paper and StarCraft paper have the recommended settings that you should use on the back of the packaging, so just flip them over and start with those settings. The final step is step number 6, and that's to keep in mind that sublimation requires a lot of trial and error as well as research. After you start getting into sublimation, you may find that you have to adjust your print settings if your colors don't come out correctly. You also may need to alter your time and temperature settings depending on your heat press, and those settings might even change project by project. So do not go into sublimation expecting everything to work perfectly on the first try. Instead, go into sublimation expecting to take a little while to get the hang of the process, buy a few extra sublimation blanks so that you can experiment, and then you'll be set up for success. If you want to learn more about sublimation, I hope you'll continue watching the next episodes of my sublimation series. I'll put the link to the next video on the next screen here in just a moment. If you haven't already joined one of my crafty fams on Facebook, I would love to have you be a part of them. So I'll be sure to link both of my Facebook groups down in the description below. And since you've made it this far in the video, I would really love to get to know you on social media. So please search for me at DIY Alex Vanover on pretty much all major social media platforms. I'll also put direct links to my profiles down in the description below. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more just like it, then be sure to subscribe to the DIY Alex YouTube channel and be sure to ring the bell so that you get notified every single time that I put out a new video every single week. But don't wait for next week's video. Be sure to check out this one next. Or if you want to make your DIY dreams come true, be sure to check out this video. I know that you're going to love it.